Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Just letting you know we are moving into a new chapter of notes. And so for the four of you that actually watch this, I'm hoping that it'll be helpful and insightful. But remember, there will be a quiz at some point over the notes, and so you can go back and watch this over and over again if you don't understand something. I'll be posting extra credit on the class wall somewhere at some point, and so you should be able to see that, so keep an eye out for that. And then lastly, we are approaching the end, so make sure that you are persevering and doing everything that you're supposed to do so that you don't get behind, and then hopefully summer will come early to you, kind of like it already has. But you won't even have to do online learning anymore, so hopefully we'll get there soon and you can finish well. With that being said, I want to look at the notes. We are in new chapter, ecology. And this is going to be the study of relationships between organisms, between organism to organism, and then those organisms and their physical environment. An animal's environment or its habitat where it lives is going to include all living or biotic and non-living abiotic factors. Living, biotic, non-living, abiotic. That should be a review from biology. All right, the tolerance range is going to determine where an organism or an animal can establish its habitat. It's determined by a range of values that an organism is going to survive in and do best in. And so we can see here that there's an optimum range for success, and so this is where an organism will most likely survive and thrive and produce and function at its best. Organisms can survive outside the tolerance range, just not for very long. And so the idea is if you get out, to get back in as soon as you can. Energy is the ability to do work. This isn't a physics class, so we won't get into that too much. Other than that, organisms require and use energy to survive. And so that's one of the characteristics of a living organism, is to obtain and use energy. And so we do that in different ways. Autotrophs are going to make their own food from sunlight or chemical reactions. Usually it's going to look like plants. However, there are some small single-cellular organisms that can do this as well. Heterotrophs, or animals, will ingest or consume other organisms, whether it's plant life or other animals, to get energy. And so the two ways to do the whole energy thing: autotroph, make their own food; heterotrophs, consume to get that energy. And so then an energy budget is how much total energy intake you get, and then how you use or lose that energy. Energy can't be created or destroyed, and so it's recycled constantly. And so how you're taking that energy in and how you're using it or losing it via heat or excretion, that is going to fall within the parameters of an energy budget, making sure that you're not overstressing your body or not getting enough, taking in too much energy and losing it, things like that. Biotic factors, going back up to that habitat, we'll look at some biotic. Don't necessarily know we'll look at abiotic, but I'll kind of talk about them some. Biotic factors: a population is going to be a group of organisms of the same species. And so humans would be a population, dogs would be a population, cats would be a population. If you stick all of those together, they make a community. But right now we're just looking at populations. Populations will change over time as a result of birth and death rates, as well as immigration with an I coming in, immigration with an E exiting. And so as organisms are born and die and come and go, the size of a population will change. There's two different kinds of growth we can look at: exponential and logistic. Exponential growth: in the presence of unlimited resources, a population can continue to double its size over time. If we look down here at the picture, you can see in the red that the exponential growth is J-shaped. And so it starts off small and then it almost grows vertically because it's doubling its size each time it increases. The next type of growth is logistic growth. because there's a limit to resources in our world and that there isn't unlimited resources and we can't continue to grow forever, most growth is going to look like logistic growth. Because there's a limit to resources, eventually this idea of a carrying capacity is reached, and then that growth will begin to plateau and flatten out. It may even drop off and then come back up a little, but it will stop growing. So the carrying capacity is the maximum number of organisms that the environment can support, and it's determined by limiting factors. A big example of this right now would be the coronavirus. Why do we want people to shelter in place? Because the virus was growing or infecting exponentially. However, with social distancing and other means of separating yourself, we were able, the goal would be to flatten out that growth or the infection rate among people. And so carrying capacity, or this line here, is determined by limiting factors. You have density dependent factors and density independent factors. Density dependent factors are more severe the more dense the group is. So the higher the number of organisms in a smaller area, the more dense a population is, the more these factors have an impact on population size. And so competition for resources, not everybody can go after the same food source. Other organisms will exclude other animals and things as they compete for those. Some animals are better suited for competition than others. And so that makes it a density dependent factor. Disease and illness, going back to the coronavirus or COVID-19, it spreads when we're in close contact. So the whole idea of us not being in school right now is to prevent that. And so we are trying to spread ourselves out because this is a density dependent factor. So if the less dense the groups are, the better chance of beating the virus. You also have parasitism, where you have a parasite that moves from host organism to host organism. And then predation, where predators are going to be hunting prey. Density independent factors influence the population regardless of population density. And these will be natural disasters, extreme weather, human impact like construction or deforestation, going in and clearing out a bunch of land to build a new shopping center or residential area. We don't see the impact that has on the already established environment. And so there are organisms that live there, and then we're essentially forcing them out. And so there's that's going to affect whatever's there, regardless if there's 3 animals or 100. If they go in to clear the area, that's going to force out whatever's there out. Looking a little bit more specifically at competition, I do want to go back up and look just one more time and show you exponential growth. Goes up, J-shaped curve. Logistic is S-shaped. It flattens out there. There is still growth happening. Well, not necessarily growth. But yeah, the population size isn't shrinking because it's not continually growing up. There's still a high number. The size of the population won't begin to fall off until we have negative growth or that line begins to go down. So there is still a high number of growth there. It's just not growing exponentially. Once it plateaus, the amount coming in and the amount leaving sort of balance each other out. In competition, I'm going after limited resources in the same area at the same time. I'm sure that you have been in competition in some regards before in your life. Animals are in competition all the time. There's 2 kinds: intraspecific competition, which is among members of the same species, so 2 dogs going after the same thing, or 2 squirrels fighting after the same resources. That would be intraspecific. Interspecific is when members of different species, so that dog and the squirrel, are both competing for the same resources against each other. Predation, this will be forms of competition. Predation, so you have a larger predator going after a smaller prey, usually. When an animal kills to eat another animal, it's predation. Herbivory are animals that feed on plant products for food. So predation would be more your upper level consumers. Herbivory would be your primary consumers, the ones that will feed off your autotrophs or your producers. And within those two, you have herbivores that'll eat plants. Obviously, herbivory, they're going to be your primary consumer. And then carnivore and omnivores will both eat animals, but omnivores will also eat plants. And so those are your three main types of feeding for animals. Another note that I want to point out is that competition rewards one and leaves the other without, which drives them to look elsewhere or die. You might think this is funny. I probably laughed too hard at this as I was putting it together. Obviously, you see a recent form of competition that affects us is the fighting for toilet paper and other goods at Walmart. It could be anything. Germ-X, toilet paper, bacon, I don't know. Whatever you like, it's probably gone. And so just don't find yourself in competition. I don't know if you can see this. When you have it on your notes, you should go back and look at it. It's pretty funny. Don't catch yourself in competition right now because you missed out or didn't plan ahead. All right, let's keep going. Symbiosis was going to be two organisms living together in a close, intimate, or dependent relationship. One depends on the other. And so, it's a vital relationship. Without that relationship, there's going to be one species or one organism that will perish or die if it's not in that relationship. One form of symbiosis is parasitism, and this is a bad form of symbiosis because an organism is going to live either on a host or in a host, and then the parasite is going to benefit, and the host will oftentimes be harmed in the process. Commensalism, one will benefit and the other is neither helped nor harmed. It's just kind of there. And then mutualism, both organisms are going to benefit from the relationship. Two different species working together to help each other. So I do have some examples. Obviously, ticks are a no-no. They are a parasite. You could talk about getting worms. That would also be a form of parasitism. But there's no good that comes from it. And so, there's good for the tick, but there's no good for you. And so that would be parasitism. Commensalism, we can see here, if I zoom in, you can see there are some fish around the shark. They're essentially going to be cleaning off and feeding off the sides of the shark, debris and things, or things that get stuck to the shark. And so they're essentially cleaning the shark. They're getting food, and the shark is not necessarily benefiting from the cleaning. It's just kind of there, but he's also not eating the fish. And then no fish are going after these fish because, they have like the biggest, best friend protecting them that there is in the ocean. So, assuming, it's a big shark, it might be a little shark. No one wants to mess with sharks. So, unless you're hunting them, or you're deep sea fishing, maybe, if that's your cup of tea. Mutualism, both are going to benefit. The bees take the pollen, or they also use it's going to help them make the honey. But it's also going to help the plant species in terms of pollination and fertilization when the pollinators drop off the pollen elsewhere. If you took botany or you're with us with botany, we learned all about the pollen. Remember throwing the sugar and stuff at each other at the game we played outside. It was a lot of fun. If you missed it, I hate it. Take botany next year. Adaptations. Really the main one we're hit is camouflage, which are animal color patterns to help hide it from others. And so there's a couple of different ones. Cryptic coloration, it's where it takes on the surrounding environment. It blends in with what's around it. Counter shading is going to be where it's dark on top, so things that are above it, looking down or flying over, don't see it. Aposematic is where it's like a get back warning. It's where it's going to flash bright colors or patterns, or something that you're familiar with that hey, that's that's a bad thing. Whether it's a snake coloring or a skunk lifting its tail, you know, if you see a little black critter with a white stripe lifting its tail, you should probably run away. Mimicry is where the organism resembles another organism to try to intimidate whatever is hunting it or around it. Communities, like I mentioned earlier, are all populations living in one area. They are members of different species living together. And then our last little bit for today, I'm going to come back and hit on taxonomy later. But the trophic structure, an ecosystem is the community that we just talked about, plus the physical environment, how they interact, much like when we were talking about the habitat earlier. Energy is going to enter in the form of sunlight. Then the plants will take that, or your single-celled organisms, and then they will convert that sunlight into usable energy for living tissue through photosynthesis. And then that energy will be moved through the ecosystem and eventually released as heat, whether it's, you know, part of respiration in the plant, or the animal that eats the plant, or the animal that eats that animal. That energy is going to be recycled through in a food web or a food chain. And then as that energy is passed on, only a small percentage gets passed on. The rest of the energy gets used in the body. And as energy is being used and converted, energy can't be created or destroyed, so it's released as heat through metabolic activity. That would be with the digestive system, in case you missed that. All right, food chain versus food web. A food chain is a single sequence of organisms where one organism is eating the next, then that organism eats that organism, and so on and so forth. But we only see it in a linear one direction way. The food web is going to be an interconnected food chain, or it's going to be interconnected food chains that are more realistic. And so you're not limited to eating one organism. And so if we look here, we can see that there are a variety of species all eating each other. And so this shows a more complex relationship in nature, which is more accurate than just drawing one line straight through. I would encourage you to look over that and just kind of get familiar with yourselves. Obviously, your primary producers, your plants and single-cell organisms, will be at the bottom. And then your primary consumers will eat your primary producers, and then secondary consumers eat your primary consumers, and then so on and so forth. Which leads me to explaining the trophic levels. There are levels in a food web, like I just said. At the bottom, you have your producers, your autotrophs, and then your heterotrophs are above them. And then energy travels up. Only about 10% of the energy consumed at the bottom level makes it to the next level, to the next, to the next. And so organisms that are at the top will have to find themselves eating more to get a lot of that same energy. Well, we're going to hit taxonomy in another video. I'm going to call it today. And I'll probably release that in another week or so. But you already have the notes. Just don't lose these. And if you do lose them, you know where to find them. You can go back and re-download them or whatever. But that's all I have for today. I hope you have a great day. Make sure to look over this. And then keep checking your email. Check the class wall. And keep looking out for assignments. We're almost done. And just let me encourage you to finish well. Y'all have a great day.